And we'll drop down to verse 24. And Nahor lived 29 years and begot Terah. And after he begot Terah, Nahor lived 119 years and begot sons and daughters. Now Terah lived 70 years and begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. And this is the genealogy of Terah. Terah begot Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begot Lot, and Haran died before his father Terah in his native land in Ur of the Chaldees. And then Abraham and Nahor took wives. And the name of Abraham's wife was Sarai, which means princess. And the name of Nahor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Ishkah. But Sarai was barren. She had no child. And Terah took his son Abram and his grandson Lot and the son of Haran and his daughter-in-law Sarai, his son Abram's wife, and they went out with them from Ur of the Chaldeans to go to the land of Canaan, and they came to Haran and dwelt there. And so the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. It is interesting that God comes to this group of people in the book of Acts, chapter 7, seems to indicate that God reveals himself to Abraham when Abraham is still in Ur of the Chaldees. And Ur of the Chaldees was no hick town. This was a very sophisticated kind of capital of the world. And it was also a very, very wicked city, very, very depraved city. And here he comes and he looks throughout this whole city, and who does he see in there? He finds a man by the name of Abram. And God is still able to find, even in the worst of situations, an Abraham. And he is able to find even you and I in the worst of situations. Now Abraham, as we're going to see in a minute, I'm going to head into chapter 12 at least a little ways before we finish tonight, because I want to share a couple things with you before we leave that. Now Abraham, when he leaves, because he had such a difficult childhood there in Ur of the Chaldees, he headed into some recovery therapy a little bit so that he'd be able to handle what it was that God was going to have for him. And I'm just kidding. If you grew up in Ur of the Chaldees, if your parents were axe murderers, if you grew up in the worst place in the world under the worst influences in the world, it doesn't stop God. It doesn't stop Him. He is able to come in and pull you out and do in and through your life just as great as it relates to the call on your life as He does with Abram. Don't ever, please, and I'm picking on some things tonight by design, but don't ever, ever limit or allow anyone to limit in your mind what God is able to do and willing to do by something that your background or a lack of what you thought might have been a better background. He knew what he was getting in Abram. He was getting just what he wanted. He knew what he was getting when he got you. There's no bargain, but it's what he wanted. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your kindred and from your father's house." And the first mark when God comes in and puts a call on our life, and there's a call on all of our lives, is to separate. And that's one of the great marks of Abram's life, later to be Abraham, renamed, as he was a separated man. He was looking for a city which had foundations, whose builder and maker is God. He was a separated man. Always, always, in our lives, and in the uniqueness of God's call upon our lives, when He tells you to get out of something, get out of that something. He knows what He's talking about. What if Abram didn't separate himself? Well, we wouldn't be reading about Abram in our Bible. I don't know who we'd be reading about, but it wouldn't be him. He would have been a man that would have come into history and gone on out of history, and nobody would have known anything about him. But it was his willingness to separate unto God that is a part of his call that we read about him today. When he says to get out of something, listen to him when he says it. Get out of your country, from your kindred, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. He not only calls us to separate us, but he promises to give us the guidance and the wisdom we need. So we say, boy, if I separate unto you, God, like you're telling me to do and walk with you with all of my heart, boy, there's no telling what might happen. He says, don't sweat it. I'll guide you. I'll show you. I will show you. And then he says, I will make you a great nation. Not only will I give you the wisdom that you need, but I will make you. I will equip you for what it is that I've called you to. And please, in your service to the Lord and in your ministry to the Lord, always the thing that we are first aware of when God calls us to do something is our inadequacy. All of us. It's always the case. It's scary when, oh boy, yeah. When he tells us to do something, we go, is that all? Just take Billy Graham's place? I had my sights on something a little higher than that. No, there's always that sense of inadequacy. Share with that person or shift over here or what? He says, I will make you. I not only will call you, separate you, guide you, but I'm going to equip you and provide for you. And then he says, I will bless you. So I'm going to bless you. There's always blessing in obeying God's call, and make your name great. And not only will I bless you, but you shall be a blessing. And God blesses us. And the place of holiness, separation, sanctification unto God is a place of blessing. Always a place of blessing. And not only are we blessed, but he speaks to Abraham and says, you shall be a blessing. I'm going to make you a channel of blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in all the families of the earth, in you, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And so God commands him, and he gives him promises for blessing as it relates to the commands. And God was going to bless all of the earth through this man. Number one, through the Hebrews, through the Jews, through the nation of Israel. And then number two, the supreme way, through the one who would come through that nation, through the Messiah who would come, Jesus Christ. And so Abram departed as the Lord had spoken to him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And so he takes and he obeys God, absolutely obeys him, and moves on, and he obeys at some expense. I mean, it costs him something. But he departs and he moves forward. And let me say this. He doesn't know what's out there, except God has given him promises related to what he's going to do out there. And the life of obedience is the most exciting life for anyone on the face of the planet. And as we obey him, it's like, what are you going to do, God, in my life and through my life out here? It's the most exciting life there is. And then Abram took Sarai, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people whom they had acquired in Haran, and they departed to go to the land of Canaan. And they came to the land of Canaan, which is modern-day Israel. And Abram passed through the land to the place of Shechem as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh, and the Canaanites were then in the land. And so then the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, to your descendants, O you man without a child and a barren wife, to your descendants I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And he moved from there to the mountain east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord and called on the name of the Lord. And so Abram journeyed, going still toward the south. It is very, very interesting to me here that the marks of Abram's life, and you see it here in these verses, is he's a man that was always building an altar. He was a man whose life was marked by two things. Number one, a tent and an altar. And a tent speaks of being a pilgrim. It speaks of being a sojourner. And you read about Abraham, and one of the things that is so appealing to me about his life is that everywhere you catch him, he's acting like a sojourner. He's acting like a pilgrim. He's acting like this is not home for me. And I love it, and we'll see it a little bit more in the next week or two. But he knew that this is not, and for the Christian, this is as bad as it gets. This is as bad as it gets. And as bad as it is, it's an abundant life in Christ. It's an abundant life. It's a rich life that we have in him. And so here he is. He not only pitches his tent, but the second mark is the altar. He's a worshiper. He was a friend of God. He was a friend of God. And everywhere it is, he's building these altars, building these altars, building these altars, aware of God's presence, that he's not alone. God is with me, and all. And this worshiper of God, so beautiful, this relationship with God. Now, there was a famine in the land. Imagine that. A famine in the promised land. A famine in the place of obedience. How about that? And yet it's true, and it's often true. He's right smack dab in the center of God's will, and yet there's a famine there. A famine in the Holy Land? Yeah, a famine there. And food is short there. Food is short there. And so he takes, and Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. No altar there. No altar. He makes this decision. God told him to stay in the land. And one of the most important things to understand about the will of God is it can be difficult to stay in the will of God. There can be challenges. There can be trials associated with it. But always in our mind as Christians, we realize that as hard as any trial may be, walking in obedience to God, there is a worse trial, and that is to walk disobedient to him. And he's going to discover that in Egypt. He's going to discover it. You say, nothing could be harder than this walking with God. It's terrible. It's so hard. There's a famine in the land, a famine in my mind, a famine in my heart. All my friends are gone. It's a famine everywhere. Oh, no, there's something worse. That's to head to Egypt. He discovers that. And it came to pass, when he was close to entering Egypt, that he said to Sarai, his wife, "Indeed, I know that you are a woman of beautiful countenance." Now, normally that would be an expression of flattery on the part of a husband to a wife, but he's just preparing her for worse news. And so he speaks, and he knows that the Egyptians, they're cruel people and immoral people at this time. And so he said, we're going to go down there. They're going to spot you as being a beautiful woman. Therefore, it will happen when the Egyptians see you that they'll say, "This is his wife," and they'll kill me, but they'll let you live. Please say that you're my sister, that it may be well with me for your sake, and that I may live because of you. Well, honey, you just dropped a couple notches in my eyes. Sarah's about 65 years old at this particular point in time. He says, you are a woman of beautiful countenance. 65 years old, and she's still just a beautiful, beautiful woman. Now, I read one commentator who said, and you can be sure it was a male commentator. He said the reason that she was still a beautiful woman at 65 was because she had not yet endured being barren, the ravages of childbirth. I think he wrote that just before his wife left him. I don't know how. Those are kind of last comments that a man is able to make. But she's a beautiful woman. I mean, you have a tendency to look and say, listen, chill out. I mean, they're going to find somebody younger for their harems and stuff. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman. And actually, when he says, please say that you are my sister, the fact of the matter is that she was his half-sister. So it was only half a lie. So he's only headed for half a nightmare then. So half a lie is still a lie. It's a whole lie. So he's looking out for himself. With as long as it's well with me, I know I'm going to put you in kind of a vulnerable position. And so it was when Abram came into Egypt that the Egyptians saw the woman, that she was very beautiful, and the princes of Pharaoh also saw her and commended her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken to Pharaoh's house. Excuse me, O man of faith. Methinks you're making a mistake here. Now call me just a little possessive as it relates to my wife. But she goes into someone else's harem over my dead body. Oh, call me crazy, call me old-fashioned. You think, this is the patriarch. Have you lost your mind, Abram? And so he takes and she's beautiful, and she, bye, honey. We'll see you sometime. And she goes off in behind the closed door, and Pharaoh, knowing the custom of the day, and that was that you gave recompense to the family that you purchased your wife from, and so he treated Abram well for her sake. He had sheep and oxen and male donkeys and male and female servants and female donkeys and camels. He became rich over all of this. And do you think that he enjoyed any of those things for 1 second, knowing that his wife was a part of Pharaoh's harem? You go down in disobedience and looks, and and I'll make this move because it looks like the most prosperous thing to do. Looks like life is kind of drying up over here, and so it only makes perfect sense to go over to this place, and he does this, and he gets all of this stuff, and he loses his wife, and I guarantee you he didn't enjoy a single part of any of this that was given to him. But fortunately, God went to Egypt too. And fortunately in our lives, God goes to Egypt with us when we make these mistakes and we sin. He is a very patient God, but He is also a very firm teacher. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues. I don't know what they were, but He can do boils, He can do light, He can do all kinds of things. We'll see later on. He plagues, because of Sarai, Abram's wife. God protects His plan. He was going to bring forth descendants from this man and this woman, and nothing was going to stop that. And Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you've done to me?" Ever had a pagan rebuke you? I mean, it makes eating hard when they do that. Here's a man of greater integrity than Abram at this particular point. "What have you done to me? Why didn't you just tell me that she was your wife?" I didn't kill it. And he say, I mean, these trials are big. "Why did you say she's my sister? I might have taken her as my wife." So there was no involvement physically. "Now, therefore, here is your wife. Take her and go your way." Imagine the shame that Abram felt. You think about that for a minute. You sold her into a harem, and you get her back by the grace of God. Do you think it was a rather long, quiet ride back to Canaan? Oh, man. I think it was. Oh, man of faith. How patient God is. How patient He is. Ever been there? Ever done something and you just look at it and you go, I can't believe I did that. I know better. I know God. I know His Word. And look what I've done. Not only to myself, but to this relationship, and taking God's promises and casually throwing them on the line like that. Ever done something like that where you just felt ashamed as it relates to it? I have. I have. God is very faithful. And so Pharaoh commanded his men concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had. Well, the point that I wanted to make was in the first few verses of chapter 13, which I am not going to get into to get there. So I guess we're going to have to stop at chapter 12